Show for you this morning, because if you were busy on your Saturday afternoon and you didn't realize what happened, well, the New York Times has dropped a bit of a bombshell in the Benghazi story. It's a part of a new book that the New York Times is publishing, and they released a number of chapters online yesterday, and it details some conflicting reports from things we hadn't necessarily heard in the past before.
You're right. There's a guy by the name of David Kirkpatrick. He's writing a book, and he released the first 6 chapters of this book. And if you want some publicity for your book, drop a bombshell.
This is it.
He did. We're blaming the video once again.
Yeah, I mean, this is pretty shocking. Basically, this piece suggests that we, i.e. Americans over in Benghazi, were thinking that we were getting loyalty by the locals by giving them aid, and really, there's no loyalty over there. We're having a difficult time discerning who our friends are, who our allies are, and maybe one day our friend is a friend, the next day they're an ally, but the next day they're opposition to us. But it suggests that the attack was part of some sort of organized venture that didn't have anything to do with Al-Qaeda, but the locals, and one powerful leader there named Ahmed Abu Khatala.
Yeah, and so basically the big argument is no evidence at all that Al-Qaeda was involved. And even though Fox News had repeatedly reported that there was ties to Al-Qaeda, another big part of this book being released online is that the film sparked and fueled the attack, that YouTube video in part sparked and fueled the attack, and that the attack was led by a group of Islamist militiamen.
So random militia that kind of had an attack in their mind, then saw the video, and that sparked them to go ahead and make this attack.
It's a little strange.
But it's all the stuff that it's been debunked over and over and over again.
Now, the New York Times says, look, we spent months interviewing folks in Libya and asking them repeatedly what was the motivation behind it. That's what the reporting says.
Anonymous sources,
Anonymous
Here we go
sources.
again.
So when you compare that to what we now know from, for instance, the Senate House Intelligence Committee, or for the House Intelligence Committee, Mike Rogers, who has access to classified information and who has since debunked all of this, listen to what Mike Rogers said in November of this year. Listen.
I will tell you this by witness testimony and all in a year and a half of interviewing everyone that was on the ground, by the way, either by an FBI investigator or the committee, it was very clear to the individuals on the ground that this was an Al-Qaeda-led event. And they had fairly descriptive events early on that led those folks on the ground doing the fighting to the conclusion this was a pre-planned, organized terrorist event, not a video. That whole part was debunked time and time again.
Remember when Susan Rice went on the Sunday talk shows? Of course, she was just on 60 Minutes this last week, and Leslie Stahl asked her, do you regret having gone out and done that? Because you might have been Secretary of State had you not gone on those 5 Sunday talk shows and talked about how this was a spontaneous attack as a result of those YouTube videos.
Well, she said that was the information that they had at that moment.
Right. Well, we now know that that's not the case. Greg Hicks, who is the second in command at the time under Ambassador Stevens, who, of course, was tragically killed, one of the 4 Americans tragically killed. When Gregory Hicks heard Susan Rice, this was his response.
When Ambassador Stevens talked to you, perhaps minutes before he died, as a dying declaration, what precisely did he say to you?
He said, Greg, we're under attack.
Would a highly decorated career diplomat have told you or Washington had there been a demonstration outside his facility that day?
Yes, sir, he would have.
Did he mention one word about a protest or a demonstration?
No, sir, he did not.
So fast forward, Mr. Hicks, to the Sunday talk shows and Ambassador Susan Rice. She blamed this attack on a video. In fact, she did it 5 different times. What was your reaction to that?
I was stunned. My jaw dropped. And I was embarrassed.
Like you said, Clayton, this Gregory Hicks took over for Chris after he was killed. A man who was on the ground, not an anonymous source.
And again, I want to read you a couple lines from this piece from the New York Times. Surveillance of the Americans' compound appears to have been underway at least 12 hours before the assault started. Then it goes on to say, anger at the video motivated the initial attack. Then it goes on to say looters and arsonists without any sign of a plan were the ones who ravaged the compound after the initial attack. But again, none of these people apparently have anything to do with Al-Qaeda, according to this New York Times report. These are just locals who happen to be bad guys that we had some ties to. And again, there's one mastermind that apparently, according to this article, the local American officials knew about. And he was somebody that we suspected of being a big problem.
I mean, this is a massive piece to go through, and you can dice it a lot of ways, but we're just presenting the facts. We're going to hear from Colonel Tony Schaefer in just a short while, who's spoken to the head of the Intelligence Committee for Egypt, or the head of the intelligence service in Egypt there, and says this absolutely was Al-Qaeda related. And there were extremists. This flies in the face of everything we're seeing and reporting this morning. So from the New York Times. We'll have much more on that coming up here in just a short while.
All right, but let's get to some other headlines, and we start